we just would like to formally introduce ourselves. I'm Elaine Buck, and I live in Hopewell Borough, where I've always lived. And I am a trustee of the Stoutsburg Cemetery, which is in Hopewell Township on Province Line Road, and also the founder of the museum, like Mayor Jaffer said. And the museum is on Hollow Road, 189 Hollow Road, and it was the former Mount Zion AME, which is African Methodist Episcopal Church, which was founded by Richard Allen. So if some of you have read the book, you will see some of the people that we talk about on our PowerPoint presentation today. And I'm going to turn it over to Beverly and let her introduce herself.
Hi. Good evening, everyone. My name's Beverly Mills, and I am a resident of Pennington Borough. I have the privilege of living in my family's home. It's been in my family now since 1911, which I'm very proud to say. The house was built in 1856. It was a little row of homes that was built to support the parishioners that went to the Bethel AME Church, another AME church that was a sister church to Mount Zion in Skillman. And so there's a lot of history here in the borough connected with Bethel AME Church, which they just had their 204th anniversary. So I'm just very glad that everyone was able to join us tonight, and hope that you're able to stay with us through our presentation, because there's a lot that we would like to tell you about this region and what our research has gleaned over the last 10 years, and actually ongoing. It's still ongoing.
Yeah. Beverly, I think if we maybe talk about how we got started in the first place, that might help them start our presentation.
Well, you know, I always start off by saying, you know, it's not like, you know, these two Black women woke up one morning and said, yeah, you know what? Let's just devote the next decade to researching African-American history in this region. It just came to us actually through someone that contacted Elaine Buck. And it was an elderly white gentleman from West Amwell who was seeking advice. And pretty much he was saying, you know, there is an area that's getting ready to be desecrated. And I'm really upset over this, because I know that people are buried there, and I know that African Americans are buried there, and some of them were slaves. And since we were trustees of the Stoutsburg Cemetery, he came to us hoping that we would be able to point him in the right direction of, you know, where he can get advice, you know, what he could do to, you know, maybe stop this. Was there some law, or, you know, just what could be done? So basically, that was the beginning of our odyssey. I mean, that was in 2006, and Elaine and I, you know, kind of just jumped right into this, because we thought, wait a minute, when we went over there and we started to look around, and some of the names that became known that was buried there, like Mr. Nehemiah was the gentleman's name that contacted Elaine. And he was talking about names like Hoagland and Dowdy, and that he remembered from his childhood. And we were saying, wait a minute, those names, we know people, we went to school with people with the last name of Dowdy and Hoagland. Those are our relatives. I come from a line of Hoaglands, and so does Elaine's husband. So it all kind of, you know, started at that point. And Elaine, jump in there, because you're the one that was actually threatened. So you were the one that was threatened.
Yeah. So we went to see the burial ground that was in question, And before we went, we were advised by the Attorney General's, New Jersey State Attorney General, to have the press come with us just in case there was a bone dug up or something. Now, keep in mind, we're talking about people that were buried in the 1800s, so possibly there might be a bone or two, but mostly most of the graves would have been disintegrated. So we started with the Trenton Times reporter, and so we went there, and that was our first day that we found this cemetery. After we were there, we were approached by a gentleman that lived next door, and so the person that lived next door came out, and he actually recognized Beverly. They had worked together like 20 years ago. Anyway, this older gentleman has something in his hand, and he said that he had the deed to the property, and it was owned by the Stevenson family. And from there, it should remain a burial ground forever. So that gave us all the information that we needed to get started so that we could stop this, the desecration of the cemetery.
Yes, yes.
And so then after we got to researching that cemetery, we were wondering, well, who is actually buried at our, we would consider family cemetery at Stoutsburg Cemetery in Hopewell Township, and we started researching that. And that's when everything snowballed into, from there, it turned into a book full of history. And so we're proud of our presentations. And so we're going to get started with our presentation right now. And the first, let's see. I'm going to try to get this to go into full screen, but if anybody knows how I can do it, that would be helpful. My little tool is covered up there. Oh, there it is. And in the beginning. Okay. So slide one lets you know it's a proud heritage, the African American presence in the Sourland Mountain and Hopewell Valley and surrounding area by Beverly Mills and Elaine Buck. And our next slide, we show you the sign for our Stoutsburg Cemetery Association. You really can't see the graves from this position, but when you're coming down the hill on Province Line Road, you can actually see the graves with a big, beautiful flag that was donated by the Hopewell veterans. And so we're really proud because we have it as circa 1850, but that graveyard has been there so long that we don't know how old it is. Now, keep in mind that blacks and whites couldn't be buried together. So this Stoutsburg Cemetery was specifically for black people to be buried with dignity and honor. And so it's still there. You can still be buried there. We have moved into a new generation here, and so you don't have to be black to be buried there. Anybody can be buried there, and it is very beautiful. We have a panoramic view of Hopewell Valley. And there's another slide of our cemetery with the Old Glory waving in the breeze there. And then I'm going to turn this slide over to Beverly, so we can get started on how did we get here as African Americans in these communities.
So Elaine and I, when we started our research, you know, one of the things that we talked about, we said, as African Americans, how did we end up in New Jersey, in Mercer County? Well, at that time it would have been Hunterdon County, but how did we end up in this region? So you know, these questions were eventually answered. But early on in our research, we had no idea how this all came about. I mean, how did this group of Africans arrive into this region? So then we started to find out that this woman, Queen Anne, actually had a lot to do with that. So you might not know that Queen Anne was responsible for the Royal African Company, which was chartered in 1672. And it conducted the trade through a series of forts that dotted the western side of Africa. So the main fort where they would take the Africans was the country of which is now we know as Ghana. So that's kind of like where their headquarters was located, but all up and down the western coast of Africa were these forts where they would take the captured Africans and hold them there until they were ready to transport them across, whether to the Indies or to the mainland of America. So it was an astounding number of people that were captured. And as many as 42,000 were carried away from British slave ships. I mean, the people that were captured over the couple hundred years, people don't even know how many there were. There could be 12 to 15 million people that were captured. So you wonder, okay, how does this fit into New Jersey? So in New Jersey, in 1726, there were about 2,600 enslaved individuals in the state. So by 1745, that number practically doubled to 4,700. And by the first census, which was 1800, there were roughly 12,000 slaves. I don't like to say slaves, I like to say enslaved individuals throughout the state. So that's how Queen Anne and the Royal African Company enabled this to happen. Because basically what she was saying is that the Queen, and I'm reading from our book, and if anyone has it, it's on page 81. The Queen and her colonial proprietors viewed these incentives as the means to ensure the new colony's success. The Lords proprietors granted every colonist that should go out with the first governor 75 acres of land for every slave. To every settler before January 1, 1665, 60 acres for every slave. To every settler in the third year, 30 acres for every slave. So you can see that Queen Anne was making sure that there was a constant supply, as she would call them, merchantable Negroes to the proprietors. So Elaine, you go to the next slide here and you'll talk about the capturing.
So actually we were captured, we were kidnapped, captured, and then brought here. First we were carted off and taken to 40 different forts up the coast of West Africa, where you would stay there if you were an enslaved individual that was literally kidnapped. And you would stay there until the slave ships came and took you to the various places. And we'll show you a slide that shows the different places that the enslaved Africans were taken. These tools that you see that they have are ones to keep you so you can't run away. I don't know what that one is for. I guess you don't want to go to sleep or whatever either. Here's a slide of Elmina Castle off of the coast of Ghana. This is, like I said, just one of 40 castles. And you would be taken, separated from any adults. The children were also kidnapped and enslaved. So the children were in one section, the men were in another section, the women in another section, down in the bottom of these forts. And they kind of languished there until the slave ships got there, sometimes for a month, sometimes 2 months, waiting to go. They had no idea where they were going because a lot of times they didn't speak the same language as the enslaver. And So here's another one. It's Bunce Island in Sierra Leone, and they actually called it a slave factory. And they had a great house and a yard for the slaves. And they also, at this particular one, they had a great room, a ballroom, where the enslavers would have all kinds of dances and things while the people were downstairs in these dormitories, they called them, storerooms, kind of languishing away. But a lot of people came into Charleston, South Carolina from Bunce Island in the 18th century. And of course, here is, we call this the door of no return. And the door of no return is the door where you go out of that dank and musky basement area, and you go out to a skiff that would take you to the slave ship. And from there, you would be packed in. This is the slave ship Brooks, and it launched from at Liverpool, from Liverpool at 1781. And they packed in as many people as they can. There's hundreds of people packed in side by side, laying down, going from Africa to different, we don't even know all the places that they went to, but we do have there's another one where during the Middle Passage, this is the way that they were stacked in so they could get as many people in as possible, because they were making money off of this human cargo. And so now here's a map of the slave trade. And so here we are in Africa, and you see that we have people going to Europe, coming into New York, Richmond, Charleston, New Orleans, the West Indies, and all through Central America, South America. And then you'll see that we have the popular items that the enslaved people would work on their plantations would be the tobacco, coffee, cotton, sugar, mining, and rice. And so, like Beverly said before, we really don't know how many millions of people were kidnapped and captured. But if you get a chance and you want to look up on YouTube, look at Slavery in 2 minutes, and you'll see how many slave ships went in and out of Africa, grabbing people and bringing them to be enslaved here. Then, of course, now when you get here, okay, so you have your enslaved people. Well, this is actually a public whipping post, which some people, when you see this, you think, oh, that was just in the South. Well, no, it wasn't just in the South. It was here in our communities too. And you'll see that it was done. You'll see this, see the little black boy there. It was done for the public to see, to keep you subservient so that you wouldn't run away, you didn't steal, and all the things. You really didn't have to do much to receive the whipping. But there was a certain day that people would get whipped, and that was part of your punishment. And so you also see here, we have a slide that in 1805 in Trenton, there's a newspaper there called The True American, and they're advertising for a 15-year-old, two smart, healthy Black girls. One is 15, and the other is 6. So really, it wasn't just for adults. It was for adults and children that would be enslaved. And this was being advertised by someone with the last name of Wyckoff. Well, there's a lot of Wyckoffs in our area. And so we just, when we look at this, we see all kinds of names that we recognize from our communities. Mm-hmm. Now, local ports of entry. So Beverly and I were researching. We said, okay, now, how did they actually get to our areas? Well, basically, people would come in through Long Island, and then they'd be auctioned off at Perth Amboy. And our research has led us to find out that Perth Amboy would have auctions, and people would be lined up for blocks being auctioned off. you could hear the auctioneer saying, got Negro girls, Negro wenches, Negro boys. And it would be for hours that these people were being auctioned off. And then, of course, in Philadelphia, the same thing. The slave ships come into Philadelphia, and Beverly likes to say that we did read in our research about how you could smell the slave ship coming, because these people actually were on the slave ship sometimes for a month or two by the time they got to these various ports. So you come into Philadelphia, then you're auctioned off there in Philadelphia, taken over to Daniel Cooper's ferry and brought right up the Delaware into our communities, Trenton to Lambertville to Hunterdon. From Perth Amboy were brought right up to Raritan to New Brunswick, and spread out to all the local farms in the Millstone Valley. So this was a big enterprise, and it just went on and on forever. Keep in mind that New Jersey really was they did not want to give up their slaves. They really didn't, and we'll talk about that. And then now you'll see right here, this was from the Pennsylvania Gazette, on board the schooner Hannah, lying in the River Delaware, very near Mr. Daniel Cooper's ferry, which is in Camden, West New Jersey, opposite the city of Philadelphia, a cargo of likely Negroes just imported in the said schooner directly from the coast of Guinea. And these people right here, Thomas Rich, David Franks, and Daniel Rundle, they made a lot of money. Not only were they importing rum and all the furs and all that, they realized that you can make more money off of selling human cargo. And so they made a lot of money. Not only did the people come into our region, they went to Delaware, to Maryland, and they came right into Philadelphia and got auctioned off right there. And here's a model of a schooner Hannah. This right here, the schooner Hannah is mentioned in this article right here. So we just wanted to give you an idea of what the schooner Hannah would look like. And then there's a Cooper's Ferry, licensed in 1688. It carried New Jersey's products to Philadelphia. But with those products was also the enslaved people. And then, Beverly, I'll let you take over from this for what we found out for Montgomery.
Well, as we were saying before, our research is ongoing, and you know, with our work with the cemetery and starting the museum, we were contacted by the Museum of the American Revolution, and they were wondering if we could help them perhaps identify the names that showed up on a poll list in 1801 from Montgomery. And they were interested in highlighting them for their upcoming commemoration of when women lost the vote. So they were very interested in whether we could help them identify people of color and females who could have voted in that election. So we were very happy to find, yes, Thomas Blue, Judith, who was also went by Jude, Ephraim Hagerman, and Henry Lane appeared on that list. And so this was an extraordinary find, because you're talking about a very slim amount of time that people of color and women were able to vote. So you're talking about 1801. Now, what is really interesting about Thomas and Judith Blue is that they were formerly enslaved people. They were enslaved by the white Blue family who migrated from Long Island, and they were wealthy. They had a mill around the what's that area? Province Line. What's the road, Elaine?
It would be, yeah, Province Line Road. and
Province line, and yeah, and down
in Lauenburg.
Lauenburg, up around that whole area. So that's where they were living. So the patriarch of the family, Michael Blue, passed away, and so for he passed away when he was married to a second wife, and his second wife had younger children, and these two younger sons were not old enough to take over as the plantation as it was. They were described as plantations. That term also was something that we found very interesting, because when you think of plantations, you always associate that with a sprawling southern, like Tara, like, kind of image in your mind. But the term plantation actually was a northern term, and it pretty much meant farm. And so Thomas and Judith, they'd struck a deal, the White Blues, as I say, struck a deal with Thomas that he would be freed if he would work the land and the majority of the acreage, and split everything with the young widow, and of course for the maintenance of her family. So that's how he obtained his freedom. And Jude, or Judith, also obtained her freedom. So these people went from being enslaved to eventually becoming landowners, because when the young boys became of age, Thomas Blue then disappeared off the tax roll. But then at that time, they were able to establish their own livelihood and their own land. So it was just an extraordinary story, and for Montgomery, it should be very, very proud of that story, because it doesn't happen often.
Yeah.
So we'll go to the next slide.
And every time I look at these names, I see another name over here. It says Robert Stockton, Judge. Yeah. And so, we really have a rich history in our
very rich history. Yeah.
As you see here, Beverly, there's that Ephraim Hageman.
And what was interesting on this poll list, if you can see it, it's very, very small, but the inscriber wrote Negro above his name. He did not do that with Hagerman or with Lane, but we do know that Henry Lane was an African-American man. He was one of the 3 African-American men who actually purchased the land where the Stoutsburg Cemetery is now located, from the Stout family. So that name was familiar to us, and when we saw that, we immediately knew that he was a person of color. So we go to the next slide.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah.
We the reason why we have this here is, we have so much research that when we were writing the book, literally there was a table in Elaine's house that stretched across her dining room into her kitchen, and you couldn't see above it. I mean, we didn't have any other place to store everything. So as we go through stuff, we now find things, oh yeah, we forgot about that. Oh my God, yes. I mean, because we couldn't put everything in the book. But the reason why we put this in here is because throughout our presentations, there's been people that have asked us about, slavery in the North, was it really as terrible as it was in the South? Weren't the Northern masters more benevolent because of them being in the North, and that they really were more like family, because you're only talking about 2, 3, 5 at the very most of these enslaved people that would be with a family. So, no, slavery is slavery. So we always, say, really, they had whipping posts, as we talked about earlier. There were black codes that enslaved people had to live by. This is what I came across. I forgot I had it, and it was from the Somerset County Genealogical Quarterly, and it was talking about when they were cleaning out an area, and they found this reference to what happened 100 years earlier, or around 1776, and they were talking about what happened to these people, like Jupiter, Negro of Colonel McDonald, indicted for larceny, pled guilty, ordered to receive between the hours of 1 and 3 this afternoon 20 lashes on the bare back, and on Monday the next the like manner at Pluckerman. Caesar, Negro of David Henry, convicted of theft, sentenced to receive 39 stripes on the bare back this day at Hillsborough between the hours of 12 and 3, and on Monday next 39 stripes at Crossroads. I mean, you're talking about pretty much a death sentence, 39 stripes, and then the next day or a few days after, the same. It'll pretty much kill you. So as far as how benevolent was the North to slaves, no. We'll go to the next slide. So this
we talked about slavery in Rocky Hill, settled in 1701, incorporated in 1890. So we found some information about some men in Trenton that were accused of poisoning several whites in 1738. Then there's a slave revolt that's recorded. A man on a Rocky Hill farm in 1739 was said to have taken an axe to his owner's son. And there were, not surprisingly, no trials. Once apprehended, the men were tied to a stake and they were burned. So, I mean, when you hear this and you hear it from our communities, you can almost hardly take it in. And then we have this from the West Amwell Township. This is the area where we had the enslaved burial ground that we found. But this is from West Amwell Township's history. And it says that there were plantations and they had masters. This Thomas Wilson, our records show that Thomas Wilson had been a slave, owned considerable land in Amwell, but having been a slave, he could not will it, or it would be sold, and it would be sold at public sale. So Black people have really been under the gun for a long time, because you really, property is everything. I mean, you need to have property to pass down to your families. And as you see, that right was taken. I'm surprised he even had any land in the first place, because we really weren't allowed to own land. So he had a considerable amount of land, and he dies and he can't will it to his family. So that's no good either. Then we show you these coffle lines when we talked about how did we get here. Well, a lot of times we were put in coffle lines and chained together. We look like we're well dressed, but I don't know about all of that. Half of us look like we might have been half dead by the time we made the journey. But these coffle lines would be from Philadelphia and from also from Long Island. And this is where people they had to walk to a lot of the places. Some people walked to Maryland, some people walked to Delaware, and this is how we got there. You see the enslavers on a horse, and the rest of them are kind of walking along behind them. I don't know what this guy here is doing, but if you take a look, you'll see it was not good times for us. Then, of course, you have people that were run away. So you got a local runaway slave ad here in Princeton, and it's a mulatto who is supposed to have been, he runs away and he has a horse. They're concerned about him, and they're concerned about the horse. The horse, they have a horse that's like 6 years old, and then they tell you how high, how tall the slave is, and give you all his dimensions, and that he's strong, and he's well made, and and they even go to tell you what he has on. He has on a new red coat, and white stockings and boots, and a black velvet frock, and a beaver hat, and so these people want their runaways back, and they are going to give you $250 for the horse and the runaway. And so you'll see that these advertisements are in the Pennsylvania Gazette, and they just go on and on. Beverly and I went to Rutgers, and we just had to stop looking. There were so many runaways, and you wonder, how did they actually run away and not be spotted? Because you can't change the fact that you're Black. I mean, some people, when, indentured people could actually change their looks, and nobody would notice or whatever. But if you're Black, you're pretty much, that's it, it's a wrap. And any white person could stop you. And people were being paid a lot of money to capture runaways. So, I mean, it was a big business all around. And then we talk about our museum that is in your community in Montgomery on Hollow Road. This Richard Allen was formerly enslaved. He was in Philadelphia. He was also in Delaware. And he decided that he wanted first to be a minister, and he wanted to spread the word all around. But before he did that, he was worshiping in the White Methodist Church in Philadelphia. And he, along with Absalom Jones and some other Blacks, were taken to the church, but they were designated to the balcony area. So they went, him and Absalom Jones and a couple others went down to the altar, and they were saying their prayers, and they were literally drugged out by the white parishioners. They could not come down there and join in. And so at that particular time, on that day, when they asked them to get up and stop praying, Reverend Richard Allen said, just let us finish our prayers and you won't have to be bothered with us again. And there was a massive walkout. And so that's in the mid 1700s. They have the walkout, and then he starts Mother Bethel, which is in Philadelphia. It's still there today. His body is downstairs in the crypt, and they have just a big, beautiful, wonderful church there. If you ever get a chance to visit, you can go and visit there. But I said all that to say that Richard Allen made his way to Pennington, New Jersey. And Beverly, I'll let you tell them about the Bunn family in Pennington.
Yeah, so Richard Allen, in his quest to start the AME church, ends up with staying with the Bunn family over on, I don't know whether any of you are familiar where the Hopewell winery is, kind of like over there past
Cream
King down that road. But anyway, that's where that original homestead was with the Bunns. And they were also the founders of the Methodist Church in Pennington. So it was a fit with the Methodist religion, the founding of the church in the borough, and with Richard Allen linking up with the Bunns, and so he could start the African Methodist Episcopal Church, which he did. So he stayed with the Bunns for at least 6 months. It's written in his memoirs of how being in the area. And so from that, we can gather that he was speaking with the African Americans, the free and enslaved African Americans during that time, about becoming an AME parishioner, which is exactly what happened. Many of these parishioners would meet in someone's home, or they would meet, in a little area where they could, kind of be away to themselves. And that's how the church was actually founded. The church, which is literally 2 doors away from my house and the room I'm sitting in right now, that the building was actually built in the mid 1800s, but they had been worshiping in the house where it was actually my aunt's house, but unfortunately the house was torn down, and this was before Pennington passed the historic ordinance, and I just wish it had been before that. That house would have been saved. But anyway, they would meet in my aunt's house prior to that, around 1816 or in the early 1800s. So this whole area is Bethel AME, one of the first AME churches in the state of New Jersey.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what Bethel. If you come through Pennington, you probably recognize this. Of course, back in the day, it's it wasn't that big. It has an addition that's put on there, and it's gone through some transformations. But this is on the exact same site where it was in 1816.
Mm-hmm. And our research has led us to realize that we are related to the people that we're talking about. And we had no idea until we started researching this and their connections to these historic sites.
Mm-hmm.
And here you will see that there's a smiley pastor, that's Reverend Gregory Smith. He's holding the collection boxes that were made by the African congregants. And so, I mean, we're really deep in cultural history here in our communities. And this is the inside of the Bethel Church. And it still looks the same when you go in there. And then, of course, this is our Stoutsburg Sourland African Museum. That church also started after Reverend Richard Allen was in the area, too. So we're really proud of that, too. And if I could just do a little infomercial, we're always happy to receive any and all donations. One of the things that I say is we have all the money we need to do the restoration and to build our education and cultural center. That's the good news. But the bad news is it's in your pockets. So just if you feel you would like to help us, we will certainly be happy to receive your donations. Then we made a list of some of the family names that mirror, these are the white family names from our communities, and some of them you might know. I know Black people with these same names.
So we talk about, can we go back a little bit?
Yeah, we can go back.
Let's go back to Blackwell.
Yeah, all right. And there's the Blackwell family, and we mentioned the Hoagland family.
Hoaglands.
Mm-hmm.
Hageman, yeah, all of those names, they mirror the white founding families, because somewhere in the family line there were enslaved people that took on the surname of the master.
Mm-hmm.
You have to understand that Black people were not given a last name. You were property. So your name, whether it was Nance or Mary or Tom or whatever your name you were called, so what is your last name going to be when you were finally freed or manumitted or whatever? Because say, for instance, okay, let's talk about the Blackwells.
Mm-hmm.
I come from Blackwells. My 4th great-grandfather's name was Frost Blackwell. He was owned by a Andrew Blackwell, who was a bachelor, but he was also a veteran of the Revolutionary War. So Frost Blackwell, I have no idea how he came to the family, how Andrew Blackwell came to own him, but what I do know is that was his master. because I have Andrew Blackwell's will, where he was freeing Frost upon his death. And so when Andrew Blackwell passed away in 1818, Frost Blackwell was to receive his freedom, which he did. What was interesting is that not only was he to receive his freedom upon his death, but he was also to be given $100. So he received the $100, and he used some of that money, actually had to save it up to purchase the freedom of his wife and his then young son. He had been married during this time, because by this time Frost was a young guy around early 30s. And so his wife was enslaved in a plantation. We do believe, with working with the Hunterdon County Historical Society, we do believe that the Van Vechten or Van Vactor family was in Somerset County. So how that connection was made with Frost and Nancy Van Vector, I don't know. Maybe it was the kind of thing where families with, with similar backgrounds and societal type of, I don't know, likeness, whatever you might say. It's, in society, maybe they, visited, or they, had parties together, or, so how he met Nancy. But he ended up marrying Nancy Van Vector, who became Nancy Blackwell. And that's my family. And Frost was freed, and then it took him 9 years to purchase his wife's freedom. And so that would have meant that purchasing Nancy and their first child, who was Samuel, that would have meant that when Samuel was born, he would have been born considered a slave, because you take on the status of the mother. So even though Frost had been freed, Nancy and Samuel were still considered enslaved.
So you'll hear people say that Black people owned enslaved people, and that's a perfect example of how, one person, a Black person, owned his wife and his son. Beverly, Frost Blackwell also ran the distillery, the Mount Rose Distillery, that a lot of people see in our community here. And so when we find out all this information, it really is just something that we really I didn't know. And my maiden name is Hunt. I have no idea if I'm connected to the Hunts that were in our region. But I mean, you'll see some of these names that you recognize.
Yeah.
And, it's just the way it was, but we really would love to do some connection to the Black families and the white families. And Beverly, I'll let you just start with this one, because we're almost done with our slide presentation.
Yeah. While we were researching, we came across, different apologies by different corporations, and pretty much it's, their connection to the slave trade and how they made their starts, pretty much. I know that Lehman Brothers now in Etna, so when the slave ships were coming across the Atlantic, traveling across the Atlantic for a month or two, or 4 to 6 weeks or whatever it is, by the time they would reach their destination, there would be pretty much,
half dead.
Half dead, yeah, half dead. There was numerous, with the percentage of, you know, it could be up to sometimes up to 50% of people that didn't survive or had literally threw themselves overboard. So these insurance companies would insure these slave ships. And so these policies that were written for these slave traders, so this was, we put this on here because the North was just as complicit in the slave trade as the South. Even though the North had given up their slaves, the original 13 colonies was the origin of the slave trade. Now, New Jersey abolished slavery in 1804. It was called the Gradual Abolition Act of 1804. But what did that really mean? It meant that if you were born on July 4th, 1804, you were considered an apprentice until the age of 25 for a male and age 21 for a female. So legislatively, it looked like you were freed, but not really, because you were still on the hook until you reached a certain age. Now, if you were, so to say, there was light at the end of the tunnel for your freedom. Mm-hmm. If you were born prior to July 4th, 1804, you were pretty much a slave for life. Mm-hmm. Now, how do you get your freedom? You could be manumitted in the will, like my fourth great-grandfather on both sides, Friday True Heart and Frost Blackwell, through the wills of their masters. Some people were actually able to buy their freedom and buy their time through having, you know, gardens and things, and just being very just tenacious about, you know, ways that they could raise their own money through their gardens or through sales or whatever, and they were able to kind of, you know, buy their time from their enslavers. It did happen. In the book, The Slave That Whipped Her Mistress and Gained Her Freedom, that was written by Dr. Larison about the life of Sylvia Dubois, who lived to be 120 years old in the Sourland Mountain. She talks in the book about how her mother attempted to buy her time from a few of her enslavers, and actually was able to have little glimpses of freedom. But then when she would not able to make her payment, or missed a payment, or got behind in her payments, she was promptly back as an enslaved person. So it was, so it pretty much, it was, by the time that the North had abolished slavery, it was ramped up all down south because of tobacco, which Virginia and North Carolina, after tobacco had depleted the soil, now you're talking about cotton, which was king cotton. So the price of a slave to go into the deeper south, it was huge. So that was still a big business, a huge business. So when we talk about the North kind of likes to wipe their hands and say, oh no, no, we were done with slavery, it was over, by the early 1800s. Mm-hmm. Not really, because here you have all the way up into the Civil War, you have these companies that were reaping the benefits of slavery. Mm-hmm. So we'll go to the next one. Just other corporations that we listed. So, yeah, and this was interesting. In 2002, about 200 Louisiana residents identifying themselves as descendants of slaves filed a federal lawsuit seeking reparations from companies that allegedly profited from slave labor. So there is a whole listing of them that we talked about.
Oh boy.
Even Tiffany and Company, Brooks Brothers. Yeah, Brooks Brothers was interesting because they would supply the clothing for the how you would say the house Negroes, the ones that were to make the finer appearance. When you have your plantation and you're down south and you have your slaves in the house dressed in a different fashion, in a finer fashion than the slaves in the fields. So Tiffany and Company, Brooks Brothers was one of the companies that would supply clothing.
Mhm. And I do believe that was our last slide.
Should I? Okay, there we go. Thank you so much. I'm sure that everyone really has benefited from the formal part of your presentation. And now we're going to open it up for questions. But since I'm the moderator, I get to ask the first question. So I'm going to claim that. So actually today I was just recording my video for Montgomery's Veterans Day commemoration. And I did mention learning so much from your book about the military service of the African-American community in this region. So I was wondering if you could just share a little bit about that. Why is it that you decided to focus on that in your book? And what is it that you hope the community would know or understand about that part of our history?
Jay, I think that the Black men that were determined to fight for the Union was extraordinary, because we're talking about in our cemetery alone, we have 12 identified United States Colored Troop veterans that are buried there. There could be others, we don't know. There are areas in our cemetery that are, we've had ground penetrating radar done. There's a whole area where they say there's several anomalies here, we're not sure. So we know that they're probably burials, because there's several that don't have headstones. They're just there. Because that whole cemetery, the old timers used to say, oh no, that's kind of like the new part. There was an older part back in the day. So we really don't know. When the three gentlemen that I mentioned before, when they purchased the land from the Stout family, they formally registered the sale in 1865, mid 1800s. But they have been using that land long before that we do know. Mm-hmm. So when you're thinking about a group of veterans there, and also in the Pennington African Cemetery, there's at least 10 veterans that are buried there. So you're talking about men that did not hesitate to join the Union, to fight on behalf of the Union, and to end slavery. Because what was amazing is that these men did not hesitate. Lincoln did not want Black men to fight in the Union. And then when Congress agreed, and at that time it was looking pretty dim for the North, they allowed Black men to come and fight. Now, New Jersey did not have a training ground. They had to go to Camp William Penn outside of Philadelphia. There were some Black men from Pennington that actually went to Rhode Island, but New Jersey did not have a training ground. So these men went, and what we understand from Camp William Penn is that Frederick Douglass visited there to give the troops, support, and to rouse them up to go into, to fight on behalf of the Union. We also have researched and found out that Harriet Tubman had visited there. So these people from our little hamlet witnessed extraordinary legends of history. They were there, and they came back to tell the story.
And I also like to mention that this one little white woman let them use her property and her farm as a training ground. So, I mean, it was like she was really stretching herself out far too, because it
Yes.
just, wasn't something that people wanted to have done, but she did it. And Lucretia Mott is her name.
Yes.
And Camp William Penn was right there on her property.
Yeah. That was
Uh,
extremely brave for her to do that.
and we also like to mention that we have one of our veterans from the Civil War. Last name is Skank, and that's one of the names that you saw from Montgomery names that kind of mirror the black men's names. He went. Uh, he was involved in the Battle of Olustee in Florida, and the Confederates ended up winning that battle. And so when the Union troops surrendered, they thought they killed all the black men, but they did not kill him because he made it back and lived his life out right in our community here.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're really proud of him. And then there was 2 or 3 others that made it back, and they're buried in the Pennington Cemetery.
Yes. Yes.
Just
George
amazing.
Bolden and Williamson.
Yeah.
Yes, those veterans also made it back from Olustee, which was almost like a miracle, because it was. I know that people are familiar with the movie Glory, and the ending scene, how brutal it was. Well, they said that's the way it was. That's kind of the image that you have of the Battle of Olustee.
So we're really proud of also Aaron Trueheart, who really is, his family donated the land for the Stoutsburg Sourland African American Museum. So that goes all the way back to one of Beverly's 4th great grandfathers, Friday Trueheart. And so when we talk about this history, we're so passionate because it's our people that we're talking about that we had no idea we were related to, and what they did in our community. So Aaron Trueheart is the great grandson of Friday. Is that correct, Beverly?
Yes. Yes.
And so the Trueheart family, there's still some Trues that live locally, and we're just really proud of our of the people that we had no idea of their what they did for us.
And in our cemetery, we have veterans from all theaters of war. So, we often talk about patriotism and Black men and their willingness to fight on behalf of the country. That's been a constant from the Revolutionary War. We have a commemorative marker for William Stibes, who we believe is buried in our cemetery. You're talking about a mulatto man who we don't know where he originally came from, but we do know that he was considered one of the first African American inhabitants to make his home in the Sourland Mountain. So William Stibes and his wife Catherine had 10 children, and they were the beginning of the African American community. Now you're going back to the Revolutionary War. Now this guy makes his home here in the region, and his grandson Jonathan Stibes is definitely buried in the Stoutsburg Cemetery, because there is a headstone for him. So we often talk about African Americans love this country, but the country does not necessarily love us back. That's the problem.
It's a very sobering thing to think about. Thank you. So for others who want to ask questions, you can use the raised hand function, or you can submit your question to the Q&A or to the chat. I see Barbara Preston has a question, so I'm going to unmute you. You can talk now.
Hi, everybody. First off, I want to say thank you to Beverly and Elaine for giving this wonderful presentation. And I'd like to say that I love both of you,
Oh,
Yeah.
just to pick up on what you just said. My question is actually about Thomas Blue, Judith Jude Blue, Ephraim Hagerman, and Henry Lane.
Mhm.
Were they still slaves when they voted in 1801?
They were not.
Okay, so they were.
You had to be a landowner. You had to have some property.
Okay.
So they were as meager as it was. I mean, from our standards, when you look at what qualified them, but no, as I said, Thomas and Judith had formerly been enslaved, but they had been freed because the Blue family needed them to.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure I understood that correctly.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And will their names be in the exhibit in Philadelphia?
You know what? I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm planning to go. And just one other question. Did the four of them actually live in Montgomery? And if so, do we know where they lived at the time that they voted? Was it Skillman?
You know what? For the Blue family, they have a family burial ground right off of John Blau Road, and that's considered Montgomery, I do believe. So we're not sure where the land was, but the burial ground is right there off of John Blau Road, which is off of Great Road. So we're not sure if she continued to live in that land there, or there's some information that right on the corner of Province Line Road, her son Moses Blue owned the house there and land, and so we're not sure if she, at some point, she did own a lot of land. I think it was like 200 acres, and then it was turned back over, I guess, after a short period of time. But all I know is it should probably be around the John Blau Road area. And I'm sure somebody could probably look it up and find it in your records.
Okay, I just found it fascinating. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. There was a question that was posed in our Q&A from Dominique Young saying, have you considered writing a children's picture book to help more young people understand this history?
Someone told us we should write a children's book because we talk to a lot of children. We have to pare down our PowerPoint presentation so we don't scare them to death, but we do talk to third grade on up, and that's an idea. Oh boy, we just need to clone ourselves so we can actually make it happen.
There's so much we want you to do.
Yeah.
All right, I see a hand up from Andrea Burnett. I'm gonna unmute you.
Andrea.
Hello, you guys.
Andrea.
I just want to start by saying I'm a fourth generation Californian, and I don't know a lot about the history of enslaved people in California, if there were any, but we certainly have our own shameful background with the indigenous people. That's another whole subject for another time. But now I've lived in New Jersey for 50 years, 35 of them as a school teacher, and I don't think we even came close. Now, I don't know, maybe it's improved since I retired, but I don't even think we have come close to covering this kind of history. And I thank you so much for all your work in bringing it to the front. Thank you.
Thank you. You know, that's exactly why we wrote the book, is because African-American history has so woefully been omitted or minimized in our history books. Our story, we just feel it's impossible to tell American history without African-American history. It's the same history. It's our history. It's you know, you can't leave out one. We always also say that the South, the North may have won the war, but the South has, they have kind of, how do you say it? They have controlled the narrative.
Yes.
They have controlled the narrative. And I know that Daughters of the Confederacy and some other organizations were very instrumental in making sure what could and could not go into history books. And that wasn't just a Southern phenomenon, that reached all the way to the North also. Their reach was pretty long, and so it's not a surprise that throughout the, all these years, century and a half or whatever, that our story, the African American story, has not been told.
Thank you. There's a question in the chat, a couple of questions about how much people had to pay for their freedom. Let me find that question again. How much did any of the enslaved folks have to pay for their freedom, and how much you had an account of someone who paid for his wife's freedom? There was just a curiosity about how much that took.
Well, that would depend on the enslaver, what your value was. I mean, if you were an older woman or a woman of a certain age, I guess your value would be whatever. If you were a young male, a young strong male, your value would be at a premium. You would, so that would be determined by the enslaver, how much they were willing to, quote unquote, let that person be freed. It varied.
Thank you. I see a hand up from Marcia Tarashi. I'm going to allow you to talk. You should be able to talk now.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you so much, Beverly and Elaine. That the history that you've uncovered there is just phenomenal, and so appreciative to hear this information. It's so powerful, and it's really, I think, I would say I'm 65 years old, and I have very little history knowledge of what went on, and it's shocking. And when you hear about what went on in your own part of the world, it makes it even more real. And I guess I would like to know what our schools incorporated this history, this history that's surrounding us. Is it in our curriculums?
Well, I can speak about the Hopewell Valley school system. They have really made a huge effort to infuse this into their curriculum. Elaine and I have been working with them now for about 4 or 5 years. We started out presenting before the entire 8th grade class during Black History Month, but what it's now not just relegated to Black History Month, because African American history should not be relegated to the shortest month out of the whole year. So we are also now, I don't know if it's too premature to talk about it, but we are entering into a really exciting initiative with the Hopewell Valley school system, and it's called the Witness Stones Project. And what it essentially is, it started in Connecticut, and it's recognizing something significant about an enslaved person. And teachers are involved. They are trained through a gentleman that started the project in Connecticut, where they train teachers, and then who then in turn train the students how to look at primary documents, glean information, and construct the story about the enslaved person that they're talking about. And at the end result, after a period of time, there is actually a stone that gets placed near a very significant place of that dealt with that person's life. So be on the lookout for information about that coming up real soon. We're in the preliminary stages, but if all goes well, we will be the first school project outside of Connecticut to have this happen. We're very happy.
We really would like to recognize in some kind of way like that all the African Americans that we have listed in our book. And, you know, we would love to have these stones all throughout our community.
Love it. Yes.
Yeah. So that people don't say, what is that little church? I pass by it all the time and I never knew what it was. And so, I mean, besides the book, we're doing these kind of things. I want to say that Montgomery school system has reached out to us, and the Village Road School there. So, and then Hillsborough School District, we can't praise them enough because they really have, the students are working with us. If you go on our SAM website, you will see a 360 tour created by one of the young men from Hillsborough school system and my son, and they did a phenomenal job. I mean, it's just, I love the way we all work together.
Yeah. So in answer to your question, yeah, the schools are very interested. We just wish that we had a longer reach.
Yeah. This is a national story. I mean, it's about our community, but if you listen to different things, this is happening all over the United States where people are finding these burial grounds and all kinds of things that are just the same story that we are telling, but it just happens to be we're telling it about our community because we were wondering how we got here.
Yeah. Yes.
Now we know.
It's a transferable story, absolutely.
Thank you. We have a question. How does a group of people arrange to visit your museum?
Oh, gosh.
Well, right now with COVID, you have to go on, if you go on next week, you will see a virtual tour and also the 360 tour. So right now it's really not open, but once you have to keep looking at our website. Once we can get it back open, you can contact us through our website. We have just a wonderful website that gives you information that you need, and we hopefully maybe in the spring able to start
summer. Yeah, we have construction going to be starting too on some of the from our Somerset County grant that we're so proud to have received. So construction, buttoning up some of the things that need to be done will start in the spring and probably extend into maybe June or July. So hopefully after that, and like she said, whatever happens with COVID, we don't know.
So similarly, there was someone who said that they had wanted to take a group of 7 to 17-year-olds to the museum.
Yes.
Given COVID, would you be able to host an online presentation for young people?
We can do that too. And we try to tailor our presentations to who we are speaking to. Like I said, some children are too young to see the graphic things, but we really can tailor it to the message that you would like to portray.
Wonderful, thank you. I see a hand up by Dia Sethi. I'm going to allow you in. You can talk now.
Hello.
Hi.
Hello.
Hi guys. So thank you so much for speaking today. I had attended your presentation with Montgomery Mosaic last year, and I found this time just as enlightening and as thought-provoking as I had in the past. So thank you really so much for speaking today.
Thank you.
I'm also really glad to hear that so many high schools have expressed interest in learning from you guys as well, because as a high school student, I know there's been a lot of battles at my school district, Montgomery, regarding our Black history curriculum. And so I'm really glad to hear that they were among the schools that expressed interest in collaborating with you guys.
Thank you.
Yeah, and so my question was, how do you think that companies like Aetna and Tiffany & Co., with such dark histories in the trade of enslaved people, can go about properly addressing their roots? And like, yeah, I think that's my question.
Well, and I think, this is a question that other companies, and especially in light of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and all the atrocities that's happened just in 2020, it's amazing that this year is not over yet, but that other companies that don't necessarily have a history of benefiting from the slave trade have taken a look at how can they make a difference? What can they do? And so I think that these are questions that these companies, I know that the companies that we mentioned before that were totally complicit and benefited greatly, they have offered apologies. What they've done beyond that, I'm not quite sure. I guess if you go on their website and look up and see what they have done, it's hopefully they'll have it, presented there. But I think this is a question that many companies are starting to look at: is what can we do? I mean, do we donate to X cause or whatever? I mean, there's always something that can be done, whether it's in their hiring policies or how they're looking at, whatever they need to look at to rectify the many wrongs that have been done. So I don't know whether that answers your question, but
I think there's a lot that needs to be done, and
there's a lot
I think you addressed some of it.
And and what I'm saying is that because it's when things happen like with George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and all those the other things that happened with the man that was shot in the back and everything. It shouldn't just be the flavor of the month. I mean, when these companies talk about, oh my, something needs to be done, we need to be part of the solution, we need to be part of the discussion, we need to be part of the whatever. That should be ongoing. It should not be just because of an atrocity. It should be something that continues, and not just as something that you say because it's the right thing to say at that particular time. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. So you talked about some of the work that you're doing with different school districts. There was a question in the Q&A about whether you've considered creating or developing a school curriculum. And I think, so you have these specific individualized programs. Have you considered, creating a curriculum that could be applied more broadly? Or, what are you thinking in terms of your engagement with schools?
Go ahead, Elaine.
Well, as far as the curriculum, a lot of times the Amistad Commission actually has a curriculum that they have formulated, but it's not always used in all the school districts. I mean, you'll get maybe one or two that are using it or whatever. Beverly and I have actually now created webinars. And the webinars are explaining what we would like for people all over the country to know, but especially in this community. So we actually have not really done work where we're changing curriculums, but we would like to infuse this into the curriculum. So at some point, we're going to have to do some kind of curriculum development. I see our friend Amy Perlmutter is on, and we work together with people to try to get this done, because it's so hard to do it just two people. You got to have a group of people that could work on these things and try to get it into not just a few school districts, just kind of all over. So in answer to your question, that would probably be something that we'd have to work on.
Yeah, we're not teachers.
Presenters.
we just have the research and the information.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. I see Mary McLaughlin has a raised hand, so I'm going to allow you to speak. You should be able to speak now.
Hi, thank you. I'm Mary McLaughlin. I'm the superintendent of schools in Montgomery, and I know Damian Papa is also on this call. And I know you are all familiar with Susan Lacey, one of our school principals. She has her back to school night tonight. But we've been discussing ways to infuse this history into our curriculum. So I would love the opportunity to speak with you further separately from this wonderful presentation, and really welcome that, because like you said, we are the educators, so we can help how your history and your research can be implemented in classroom lessons throughout our district age appropriately. So thank you. If I would love that opportunity. Thank you.
Oh, and we'd love it. Thank you.
And I think in the chat, someone wanted to know how to reach us. And if you go on our, we have a consulting company, Friday True Heart Consulting. If you go on that website, you will see how you can reach us and see what kind of things we have available so that we can work with the educators.
Okay. And our next question is from Shelley Bell, and I'm going to bring her into the meeting. All right, Shelley, you should be able to talk.
Hi. First, Mayor Jaffer, thank you so much. This was just great. Elaine and Beverly, this was a wealth of information.
Thank you.
Thank you for a very extensive presentation. Honestly, I thought I knew my history, but after listening to you two, I feel like I've been living under a rock. So, with that being said, I'm just so grateful and thankful for what I've heard and what I've learned. But my question is, this was a lot. How do we become well informed? How do we become more educated? And where do we start?
For us, we started with our family history. I do know I have gone on Ancestry and made a family tree for my own family. And just by doing that, my eyes have been opened. I mean, there's other things you can use besides Ancestry, but I always encourage when we're doing our presentations for people to talk to the oldest person in their family and get as much information as you can. That's why we called our book, If These Stones Could Talk. We let somebody die that has all the information in his head. Yep. And we're like, oh, if we only did this like 5 years sooner, we'd have information that we probably will never find. I hope we do. But I encourage people to do your, DNA and all that, and just find out, where did you come from? And that just right there, and that's for all people, not just Black people, it's for everybody. And you probably have somebody in your family that knows a lot of information. How did you get here? Why did you come here? And just find that out. And that starts all the research that you really need. It's like putting a puzzle together.
It is a puzzle.
Mm-hmm.
And that, and don't be discouraged. It's what would easily could happen, especially with African Americans, because of the lack of how our records were kept. We had to look through people's wills and possessions, listed along with possessions. My other fourth great grandfather, Friday True Heart, when he was listed in the will of Reverend Oliver Hart, the pastor of the Old School Baptist Church, he was listed along with the possessions, you know, all this, the finery and stuff that he was leaving to his family members. And oh, you know, he then, yes, and my servant man, Friday. So when I read, you know, when I read this, and I'm thinking, yeah, this is really something. But you do have, it does take some detective work, because you'll come across just a name, like I said. So you have to pretty much try to associate that name with a slaveholding family and just kind of work back from there.
Thank you. I have a question from Andrea Bonnet. Go ahead, you should be able to speak now.
Question, because I am a retired teacher, and I realized to my surprise that we have got our health insurance through Aetna. And there are a lot of retired New Jersey teachers. So I really think Aetna needs to be called to account for this. That's all I have to say about that. I don't know how to do it, but I think it's a huge...
I think they are one of the ones that had to offer an apology. So you can go on their site and see whether that is in fact true.
An apology might not be quite enough, but we'll see.
Oh, I know.
Yeah. They could actually write out a check to Sam. That would be nice. And then we could have our $4 million education exhibit center in 2 years instead of 5 years.
I think we got to start a campaign. All those companies on that list.
Yes, I really think so. I even think about Bloomberg, where he has his property there. I mean, who owned that property back in the 1800s, and were there enslaved people on that property? So, I mean, this is the way I think, and I'm glad I do, because people do. A reckoning needs to happen.
I'm muted. So I don't think I see any further questions. This has been an amazing, amazing evening. I'm going to just repeat what I said at the beginning, because I hadn't started recording yet. So just sharing again that this is a webinar hosted by the One Montgomery Committee through the Montgomery Mosaic Initiative. This initiative is all about building community and combating prejudice, and we hope that you'll join us. We have a Facebook group. You can be in touch about getting on our email list. Over the past several months, we've had numerous conversations about racial justice in Montgomery and throughout our country. One of the points that community members have made is that we are not taught enough about Black history. This is something we have to proactively work to change. And tonight, we've been lucky to have two amazing speakers with us, Beverly Mills and Elaine Buck, the founders of the Stoutsburg Sourland African American Museum right here in Montgomery, who are also the authors of a fantastic book entitled If These Stones Could Talk, African American Presence in the Hopewell Valley, Sourland Mountain, and surrounding regions of New Jersey. They also have a consulting firm, Friday True Heart Consultants, that can provide any of the things that people have been asking about. How do we translate this into various places? How can we spread this information? And I just want to thank you again, and hopefully we keep these conversations going. We're so lucky to have your museum and both of you as resources in our broader community, and you know, just expressing my gratitude and that of the township as well for you participating in tonight's program.
Thank you so much for the invitation. We appreciate it.